Resident Evil is one of my all-time favorite gaming series, and a huge reason for that is its incredible locations. You have everything from intricately designed police stations to your average house in Louisiana. So today I'm choosing what I consider the single best area from every mainline Resident Evil game, along with the remakes in both Revelations games. Let's start with Resident Evil 0. I already talked about this in the worst video, but I really dislike RE0's item mechanic. Without item boxes, the game constantly sends you back to the facility to retrieve things you dropped earlier. However, on the train, that problem barely matters because the space is so small. Dropping something in one carriage and returning for it later never becomes the kind of trek it does inside the training facility, for example. And Billy and Rebecca are only separated across a handful of cars instead of an entire building. Once the train crashes and you reach the training facility, RE0 keeps that momentum going for a little while. The giant chessboard puzzle and the Centaurian fight, where Rebecca gets grabbed by a giant centipede mid-puzzle and held there for the entire fight. Why are you doing this alone as Billy? I actually really don't like the training facility, but I think that there are at least moments in it. Honestly, I don't really have much to say about the train, about what makes it such a great location or anything. It's really just, it's the least annoying place in this game. Now on to the original Resident Evil. I mean, this is not a hard pick at all. It's the Spencer Mansion. It is one of the best designed spaces in the entire series, and maybe in all of gaming. The remake improves on it in plenty of ways, but the original still holds up on its own. And there's also something kind of amazing about the fact that this is the very first major location in the entire series, and Capcom nailed it this thoroughly right out of the gate. It obviously doesn't feel like a mansion a real family would live in. Some of what's hidden inside is a little too ridiculous for that.
Hello there.
But the same is true of like every great location in this series, so it never feels like a real knock against it. What gets me on every replay is that the building itself never changes, but you just do. You start out lost, there's locked doors everywhere, hallways that seem to lead nowhere, but by the end you're sprinting through rooms that used to scare you because you know the place that well. Like there's a gold emblem you place above the fireplace, and it causes the grandfather clock to reveal the shield key. It's such a weird little secret to hide in the middle of a dining room, and it just tells you what kind of mansion this is. The armor room is even stranger because the suits themselves are part of the trap. Hit the wrong switch and poison gas starts venting from holes in the floor, and you have to physically push the statues back into position to seal it before you can even get near what's locked behind it. And then the portrait room, another great part of it, is a gallery full of paintings, and pressing the switches on them in the wrong order sends the crows mounted above the lights straight at you. A room that looks decorative can suddenly punish you for not paying attention, and I just love that. A flooded shark tank makes absolutely no sense underneath this mansion either. Like, you've got to drain the whole thing to deal with the Neptune circling around in it, but by that point in the game, it barely feels stranger than anything else you found. I'm sure there's entire video essays talking about this place, but it really is just that great of how everything seems to connect, how many different seemingly random things are here, and how it pretty much carries the entire game. Like, yeah, there's places after this, but this is by far the bulk of the game. Now, before I get to Resident Evil 2, I just want to say, after this video, go check out the worst area in every Resident Evil game, and be sure to subscribe for more Resident Evil content like this. I already dragged the sewers in the worst video for not living up to this place, so I'm not doing the whole museum backstory again or anything. Like, you know what the Raccoon Police Department is. When you show up, basically nothing's open. Have the building only make sense once you've found something on the opposite end of it. You'll carry a key around for ages before suddenly remembering one locked door on the other side of the station, and opening that shortcut makes you feel like a genius, even though the game did all the work getting you there. The main hall ends up feeling like home base surprisingly fast. It's this huge open space with a save room right off it and that big statue in the middle, and by like hour 2, it stopped being scary entirely, which is funny considering that this place is supposed to be scary. Like, the STARS office filled with a lot of information on Chris and Jill. Chief Iron's office down the hall has all these hunting trophies mounted on the walls, which tells you everything you need to know about that guy before you've read a single document. The dark room where you're developing film to find hidden items is just a random little detour, and I love that it exists purely because someone thought it'd be a cool puzzle, not because it makes any sense for a police station to have one. You know what? Maybe it does. I don't know. I wasn't alive in the 90s. And also, speaking of not being alive in the 90s, I don't really get scared when I play this game because, I mean, it looks like this. But I will say, what it lacks in true horror moments, it does make up for in just having enemies show up when you least expect it and just making you jump, especially the lickers just seemingly always being placed in the worst spots. There's just so much here, and it works for all the same reasons as the Spencer Mansion. I just really like when Resident Evil locations really feel like they connect, like it feels rewarding to find different shortcuts and stuff, and the RPG does all that so well. Now for the OG Resident Evil 3 Nemesis, I already talked about how badly the park kills the game's momentum, and that loss stings because this whole stretch of city is where Resident Evil 3 feels most alive. Once Nemesis is introduced, it feels like he could show up almost anywhere, so the city has to feel dangerous even when he's nowhere near you. Right outside the RPD, Brad's already down and Nemesis is standing over him, and you get an actual choice. Do you want to fight him early for a shot at Jill Starr's card off Brad's body, or just run for the doors and deal with finding the card the hard way later? Every decision has a cost attached to it before you've reached the first save room. Later, Nemesis corners you and Carlos in the restaurant. You can hide in the kitchen, and Jill throws a lamp to knock him out. Duck into the basement instead, and a burst pipe floods the place, and now you're deciding whether to climb back up or squeeze out through the vents while the water rises. Even that decision matters later. Take the vent, and Nikolai turns up at the gas station instead of Carlos, which is such a small thing to be tracking this early in a game. And that carries into Uptown. Dario's holed up in a warehouse refusing to come out, and there's little pockets throughout the whole city that reward you the same way the RPD rewards you for learning that building. Nemesis doesn't even need to be on screen for any of this to work. Once the game's established that he can appear, you start expecting him around every corner, and that's exactly the feeling the park loses the second you step in it. But even besides all of that, I just love the design of Raccoon City here. Like, yeah, it looks very tacky today, but even as someone who wasn't around when this game came out, I can appreciate how good they made this look at the time. Plus, I always like when the environments just look very varied like here. Like, that's why I've never been a big fan of any of the labs. We're finally getting a remake of Code Veronica next year, and I'm really excited to see how it turns out. Maybe my favorite location will change, but for now, it's Rockford Island. It actually becomes a lot more interesting once you leave the prison and military facilities and enter the Ashford residence. Until then, it mostly feels like another brutal umbrella operation, but the mansion is where Rockford finally starts to get more of an identity of its own. The candlelit rooms, the oversized doll sitting somewhere it has no business being, the hidden passages. Once you understand what Alfred has been doing there, the prison, the military base, and the evil residence stop feeling randomly attached to each other and starts feeling like pieces of the same disturbed family history. The execution chamber earlier on makes it clear that Rockfort was a prison before it was anything else. Burning zombies stumbling through a room to show how brutal this place is. The Antarctic base later on has some of the game's biggest story moments, but as a location, I really don't like it that much. But Rockfort feels more complete as a location, both in terms of how it's actually designed and the story beats here, and I think it's by far the most interesting and fun part of the game. OG RE4 might just be my favorite game in the series, and it's definitely one of my favorite games of all time. I'm gonna be going with The Village here, because I just love how little time The Village wastes. Like, yeah, there's a bit of build-up in the house right before it all kicks off, but almost the second you arrive, things really start to get crazy. There's a two-story house with a shotgun sitting on the wall upstairs. There's Dr. Salvador, you know, the chainsaw guy, who tries to attack you here. You have every villager surrounding you, and you have to just go on rooftops. You have to just run around just shooting all the ganados. It's not exactly survival horror, but the whole village itself spends a few minutes easing you in until doing all this before it calms down a little bit and everyone goes to bingo. Once you finally get past that though, then it starts to feel a little more like survival horror. Resident Evil games are known for having the best part being the first third, and I gotta agree that that's the case here, because the village, while not being the most visually interesting place in the entire series, has just always been super fun to me. Like the way it kind of balances the action and survival horror, how it starts to rope you into the story, how you get introduced to pretty much all the big characters here, the different locations within the village, like the church and the lake, which I consider part of the village part of the game. I don't even really know how to explain this in depth, but I just have a blast going through it every time I replay this game. Most of RE5 is pretty linear. It's just like a shooting gallery from one set piece to the next, but the Marshlands actually lets you collect the slate pieces in almost any order you want, which alone makes it feel like a real change of pace. I still wouldn't call it scary, and it's not exactly abandoning action either, but for me it's easily the best area in the game. And that's mostly because it's an RE game asking you to drive a boat around a lake collecting pieces to progress. Like, this has gotta be one of my favorite Resident Evil games ever that has you driving a boat around a lake to collect stuff. But anyway, you're basically just driving this boat through an open network of islands, collecting 4 carved slates to open the gate blocking the way to Irvin's oil field. There's crocodiles here because, I mean, of course there is, and they're basically an instant kill if you get too close to them in shallow water, which means for once in this game, I'm not thinking about how much ammo I have. Then this part where the spike gate closes and you start getting bombarded with bows and fire bombs, and I don't know, I just thought that was an awesome segment of the game. The pacing just slows down here, and while that may sound like a bad thing, when the entire game is just action sequences back to back to back, it's actually a nice change of pace. There are other puzzle sections here that do slow it down a little bit, especially in the ruins, but I just have never really cared for the ruins. I don't think this is close to the best area in the series or anything. RE5 I do like, but it's definitely one of the weaker games for me. I actually replayed this a couple months ago, and yeah, I can't think of any other location I like better than this. Resident Evil. I haven't played Resident Evil 6 in a few years, so I could be forgetting something, but I think my pick has to be Tall Oaks. It's best from Ivy University through the cemetery, just like before RE6 goes fully over the top and the chaos stops feeling as dangerous. You go to find President Benford already turned, and Leon having to shoot him sets the tone immediately. There's a gun shop siege later on too. One survivor panics and runs out into the street against Leon's advice and doesn't make it, which is surprisingly bleak for this game specifically. The cemetery is a cool part also, with the zombies climbing out of open graves in the rain, and you can even fall in one yourself if you're not watching where you're moving. And with visibility bad enough, you can't always tell where the next thing's coming from, so definitely one of the more stressful parts of the game. I also just like how it feels like the game didn't become a Michael Bay movie yet at this part. Like, again, I wouldn't call this like OG Resident Evil horror, but it feels a lot more grounded than just the over-the-top set pieces that would come later. Resident Evil 7 was my first Resident Evil game, and I played it all the way back when I was 14, not realizing I was walking into one of the best locations the series has ever had. There were other areas in the game. The ship and the salt mine both kind of suck, if I'm being honest, and that's kind of because they're visually boring. They don't give you that same sense of unlocking the place as you go. You're mostly moving straight through them, even if that's not technically all that's happening. And when you think RE7, you think Jack Baker, and you think the Baker estate. And also, I want to be clear, I'm counting the guest house and the old house as part of this too. I played this enough times now that I'm past the point of being scared walking down to the basement, but on a first run, the whole thing just freaked me out. Anyway, you start outside, go into the guest house with nothing to fight. It's just a dark, disgusting building that looks like it belongs to a Redditor who hasn't opened his blinds since 2003. Then you watch the VHS, which alerts you to go to the fireplace and use the switch. Then you go down to the cellar, and the game eases you in right up until you find Mia locked in a cell. And for all of you who have played this game, especially if you remember your first playthrough, you know what happens next. Once you wake up in the main house, the game really opens up. Jack is forcing food on you at the dining table while Marguerite loses it in the background. Then there's the garage car fight where Jack ambushes you and a deputy right after you've barely gotten your bearings. And it's ridiculous, it's over the top, and it's just an awesome part of the game. Jack patrols the halls for a long stretch after that, so you're never fully relaxed unless you're standing in a safe room, which for some reason keeps him out completely. And he'll straight up burst through a wall near the pantry if you're not paying attention to where you're walking. The estate is worn down and disgusting, but it's also laid out clearly enough that you'll always understand how different parts connect. Even when the keys themselves are hidden in places that make zero sense. Snake keys and scorpion keys tucked away behind puzzles. There's even a place named after the Smith song. That's where Marguerite hangs out, and this place is just disgusting. I hated it, but not like hated it in a bad way. I just hated it because of how gross it was, but it is designed very well. Then there's Lucas's Funhouse, whatever it's called, and that just feels like a different part of it also, where you're progressing more straightforward through it, but have to watch out for Lucas's traps. There's just so much here. I love how everything connects. It's one of, if not the scariest places in Resident Evil history. Honestly, for me, this is a top 2 Resident Evil location. Village goes a lot more over the top with action than a lot of people expected, and I think plenty of players were disappointed by that, especially with how much time you spend cycling back through the village itself as a central hub. But there's a lot to love across almost every area in this game. House Beneviento might be one of Village's greatest strengths, at least on a first playthrough. It is one of the scariest sections in the entire series. I know I talked about the Baker estate, but honestly, this is pretty close. And it has you losing your inventory the moment you walk in, so that just adds to that. But I would say as a best area, I gotta go with the castle. It's the first major area in the game after the village, and it still carries a lot of that same RE7 feeling, like that slower exploration and real tension, well, at least before the dragon fight pushes fully into action. I love the architecture, like it just feels so grand, and remember, at this point, yeah, we saw a castle in RE4, but the remake wasn't out yet, so it was just really cool to see this design on the PS5. This is, of course, Lady Dimitrescu's place, and also I just want to say, I know people have complained about how I pronounce Dimitrescu, and yeah, Capcom messed up with the pronunciation of this, like you supposed to be pronounced, but I'm just going by how it's pronounced in the game, so don't get too mad at me for that. For a good amount of the castle, she's the stalker on me. Like, you only have the safety with the Duke because of reasons. And also, I think this is the first time in the series where people intentionally got close to a giant enemy that's actively trying to kill them. And you know what? I wonder why.
Yeah, boy.
I don't think the design of it is as intricate as the Baker estate, not in terms of like the visual design, but just how it connects. Like, it doesn't really feel like you're building the same kind of mental map you'd build in the RPD or Spencer Mansion, but it still doesn't feel like one flat space. Like the dank basement and wine cellars down low, the main hall and daughter's territory in the middle, then these outdoor stretches as you climb higher towards the rooftops for the mask. Cold is the answer every time with the daughters, but the game makes you create that opening differently for each one. I also kind of just love how small and quiet that one puzzle is, where you have to shoot the 5 hidden bells around the room based on a note taped to an easel. I just really like the design here. Again, I don't think it's as interconnected as something like the Spencer Mansion or the RPD, but it still, in my opinion, is the best area in Village.
Resident Evil.
For Resident Evil Requiem, it's a very easy choice. It's, of course, Rhodes Hill Chronic Care Center. Again, this is actually one of my favorite locations in the entire series, and one of my favorite things here is how it balances Grace's survival horror with Leon's action without making either version of the building feel pointless. You can tell it takes inspiration from the Spencer Mansion, the RPD, the Baker estate. There's just so much going on here. A big part of why it actually feels scary comes down to the zombies specifically combined with playing as Grace. Compare that to the Raccoon City zombies as Leon later in the game, and they just don't feel scary at all. You're mostly working through big open spaces, swinging an axe or mowing them down with what feels like endless ammo. Rhodes Hill, especially the Grace sections, feel like RE7 to me, and I just love that. She's got almost no combat experience, and resources stay limited the whole way through the wards and isolation ward. Zombies can transform into blister heads during a fight, and a stalker hunts her through the halls. You also have the girl for the beginning of this, who's a super scary stalker. I also really like how lived in this place feels, because until like 5 minutes ago, it actually was. There's a ton of secrets hidden throughout, and the space opens up as you progress, and you get the better wristbands. Finding shortcuts back to areas you already cleared feels the same way as the classic games do. Then Leon takes over, you're able to unlock a few more things in the building by using his axe, get into some cabinets you couldn't get into his grace, and it just feels like a whole different side of the same place. By the time you've explored the wards, the holding cells, and you've seen everything it has to offer, it's hard to not love this location. Honestly, I think there could have been even more here. Like, half the playthrough was here, but I still wasn't bored of it. Now, the only downside is if you want to consider the basement. So I consider this to be a different area. I was probably my least favorite part of the game. Although I know a lot of people don't like certain parts in Raccoon City, or don't like the Chloe section, and those are totally fair. Then there's also the part with the house outside. And if you want to all consider that one big area, you can, but I just want to specifically talk about the main area here.
Resident Evil.
The 2002 remake takes a mansion that already worked and figures out exactly what to add without breaking any of it. Areas like the graveyard and the cabin in the woods don't feel like padding added to justify the purchase. It kind of feels like it was always part of the mansion, but you hadn't found them yet. I also really like being able to see this place in detail too. The original does an incredible job with what it has, but let's be honest, the remake lets you actually take in the architecture and the decay in a way the original hardware just couldn't even come close to managing. The biggest new piece of the mansion is Lisa Trevor. She can't be killed normally, so every encounter with her becomes an escape, and gradually you realize the cabin, the tunnels, and the altar underneath the mansion all connect to what Umbrella did to her family. So while that isn't inherently part of the design of the mansion itself, it is a part of it, so I count it towards this part of the game. But as for the biggest gameplay change, it's obviously the Crimson Head system. In the original, a dead zombie just stayed dead, simple as that. Here, if you don't burn the body or take the head off properly, it comes back faster and meaner than it was the first time. Honestly, just does a lot to make the mansion feel scarier. And it literally is just a souped up version of the Spencer Mansion from RE1. Basically the same place, just with some additions.
Resident Evil.
For the RE2 remake, again, it's not close, it's the RPD. So unlike the Spencer Mansion and the RE1 remake, this feels similar and different at the same time. One of the first big changes here is the wooden boards. You find these scattered around the ground floor and can hammer them over specific windows to stop zombies from breaking in. And you could strategically place them depending on wherever you think you're going to go through the most times. Being honest, I kind of always just put them in the first window I see, but that's just me. And the other massive change, not to the building itself, just to what's in it, is of course Mr. X. So he was in the OG RE2, but he was very different. First of all, he wasn't in every scenario. Second, he wasn't like the way he is in the remake where he's like Nemesis and OG RE3, where he can just show up at any time. Because in the remake, no matter where you are here, he'll just randomly show up. Specifically, the library puzzle, I don't know why I always remember on my first playthrough, I just couldn't get it done, where I had to move the bookshelf over, but Mr. X would just keep walking in every single time. And I think this is easily the best addition to the game. And even though there's some issues I have with RE2 remake, like the zapping system not being here, like the scenarios not feeling as different, you still have different items and keys for Leon and Claire, and it does add replay value here. You have a lot of small details here, obviously being on a much more powerful system. Overall, this feels like the same place as the RPD in the original RE2, but it quite literally is like a new dimension to this place. And even if you played the original, you're not going to have this place mapped out yet, because it also feels so different at the same time. So I've said this many times, but I do not love most of Resident Evil 3 Remake. Like, the hospital's fine at best. Nest 2 sucks. The subway station's pretty bland. The RPD section, while cool, is just such a small piece of the game that it feels more like fan service than a real location. Downtown is easily the most visually interesting and varied part of the whole remake. I mean, who doesn't love that giant donut sitting on top of the shop? The park is gone entirely, which I don't really care about that much. However, the clock tower is reduced to a backdrop, but I still do like downtown here. It's a compact loop of storefronts and alleys with a subway district torn open in the middle of it. Like, on one hand, I don't like that they cut so much content, but also the smaller version of downtown works here because the tighter streets leave you much less room to get away from Nemesis, which plays right into the dodge mechanic here. The original dodges was famously inconsistent. Like, I went as far to say it was the biggest flaw for me in OG RE3, but here it actually works well. Overall, I actually really like this whole section, except that one part with the power, you know what I'm talking about, and I always just really love the design of it. I love Resident Evil 4 Remake, and in some ways I like it better than the original, but they're still pretty even for me. However, one thing I actually like better here a lot is the castle. So don't get me wrong, I really love the OG castle, and it's one of the most ridiculous stretches in the entire series. I mean, the giant Salazar statue attacking you, which yeah, is kind of in the remake, but not the same. The lava room, like, it's just completely over the top and ridiculous. But even with that, I prefer the remakes version. The castle tests a lot of ideas here, like cannons you can turn on enemies, chandeliers Leon can swing from, puzzles, combat arenas, quieter stretches of exploration all mixed together. I think it actually may be shorter than the original, but it kind of feels more streamlined. The remake's obviously going for a different atmosphere instead. Like, yeah, it's still a little campy, but it definitely takes itself a lot more seriously than the original RE4. And in some ways, I prefer the campiness of OG RE4. I say this every time, but I love Leon's dialogue in the original game.
Thanks, bro.
But I still do like what it goes for here. The village is still great here and definitely a fair pick, but I don't know, for whatever reason, I just enjoy the castle better here. Really, the only part I disliked about the castle was the maze, and also I don't love the Ashley section either.
Resident Evil Revelation.
At the time of writing, I actually replayed Revelations like 2 or 3 weeks ago, so it's still very fresh in my mind. But even with that, there's really only one pick. It's the Queen Zenobia. There's a few other sections, like there's a couple other ships, some snow-covered areas, BSAA building, but those are small detours compared to how much time you spend on that one boat. The Zenobia is a massive cruise ship with some great areas built into it. The casino, this big grand hall, and it's at its best in the narrow corridors where you see the ooze moving around. Because the hallways are so cramped, even a basic enemy can force you backward instead of letting you circle around it. I also love how the Genesis works here, where it makes you really explore every room. Also, just off topic, but there's a really great detail buried in the lore too. The ship's design was reportedly based on blueprints left behind by George Trevor, the same architect behind the Spencer Mansion, which explains some of that mansion-like quality, even though you're technically exploring a cruise ship. And remember, this came out at a point where Resident Evil was starting to lose its survival horror identity. Like at this point, RE5 had already leaned hard into co-op action, but Revelations feels like a good balance of the two. I think the Zenobia can drag a little bit at points. Like I didn't love all the backtracking, but I never thought it got that tiring. Plus, I mean, what else am I gonna pick as the best here?
Resident Evil.
And finally, we have Resident Evil Revelations 2, and I'm gonna go with the detention center. Claire and Moira wake up there, and while Claire eventually gets the weapons, Moira's stuck relying on a flashlight and a crowbar. So exploring the prison turns into a constant back and forth. One of them spots hidden items or stuns something, and the other finishes the fight. Meanwhile, the Overseer keeps speaking through their bracelet and the loudspeakers without showing herself, which makes it clear someone's watching every decision they make, even when there's nothing on screen to shoot. It also seems to get more out of that partnership than the wider areas later in the game do. The cells and narrow corridors keep them close enough together that switching between them feels more necessary than optional. And once the game hands them larger spaces and more weapons, that dependence starts to loosen. I actually gotta go back and replay this game because it's been quite a few years, because I just remember this being my favorite part of the game, but I want to try and remember more of the specifics besides this. And that is my favorite area in every mainline Resident Evil game, and I want to know yours in the comments. Also, be sure to subscribe and check out these videos here. If you enjoyed this video and haven't seen the War Series video, I can almost guarantee you'll enjoy that. Also, come join my Discord if you want to talk more about this series. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.